guys, Max here and welcome to the first chess opening video. Now, before we get into it, as you can see, I'm trying out a new interface. Please tell me what you think of it. There's a poll in the top right corner of your video, and you can also give me more detailed feedback in the comments. Let's get into it. Alright, so the opening we are going to take a look at today is the English opening. This is a flank opening, meaning that you are attacking the center using pieces from outside of the center. This will just be an introduction to the ideas of the English opening, but we will be looking at more lines and games in detail later in the series. So, the opening starts off with c4, and with his first move, White's saying, I want to control the light squares in the center. You can see that c4 controls this d5 square, but from outside the center, which is actually advantageous to White, contrary to classical beliefs, because it leaves these two central pawns very, very flexible in what they will do in the future. Some common themes are that White will fiend shadow their light squared bishop here on g2, so that it actually gives even more support over the d5 square and control over the light squares in the center, especially along this very powerful diagonal. And then, once the center is sufficiently fortified by all of White's light pieces from far away, White will eventually begin to thrust forward with the central pawns and take control for themselves. An example of a typical English game would be c4, e5. This is called the King's English variation, I believe. g3, preparing to fiend shadow the bishop, knight to f6, bishop to g2, knight to c6, knight to c3, bishop to c5, e3, castles, knight g to e2, rook to e8, and white castles. Now, here we see another advantage of not having pushed the central pawns yet, that being that White's position is very, very flexible. They can either go for a queenside push and gain space there with, for example, a3 followed by b4, d4 in the future, gaining lots of space on the queenside with these pawns. Or, and much more interestingly, White can go for a kingside attack. In high-level play, the latter is usually chosen, and to showcase the effectiveness of one such attack, I have a game played in 2018 between Maxim Rodstein and Viktor Laznica, both grandmasters. So, here we have this game. From this position after White castles, and Black plays yes, after knight ge2, knight to c6, and White castles. Okay, so this is the game we're looking at. Here we have e4. This is a very, very natural move in these kind of positions, trying to really curb the use of this light squared bishop, because now it's just looking at this very fortified e4 central pawn. So White plays d3, trying to get rid of this nuisance. After a trade on the d3 square, we have d6, b3, bishop g4, and h3, trying to push the bishop away. And also starting the kingside attack that will come. Here Black plays knight to e5, bringing the knight into the action with a tempo on the queen, queen to c2, and bishop to f3. Now here, White decides to trade the bishops. Bishop takes f3, knight takes f3 with check. Now, I must say that usually in the English opening, you don't want to trade light squared bishops because you've already wasted the move, the pawn move to fiend shadow your bishop, just for the purpose to get it along this diagonal, and by fiend shadowing, you're actually weakening your kingside. So if you trade bishops, you don't really have any compensation. However, in this case, trading the bishops is correct because White needs to find some counterplay against Black's more active piece majority and quite strong attack on the kingside with this bishop firmly lodged in f3. Therefore, White trades, bishop takes f3, knight takes f3 with check, and king to g2. Knight to g5, h4, expanding on the kingside with a tempo against the knight, knight g to e4, knight takes e4, and knight takes e4. Here, white plays bishop to b2, and now another example of one of the advantages of not moving any of these pawns in the beginning, any of these central pawns, is that the center is wide open, meaning that white's very, very powerful bishop and queen are eyeing straight to black's enemy camp. Because there are no pawns in the center blocking them, they can be very, very powerful in this open position. We have knight to f6, knight to f4, and a5. Black is trying to create some counterplay on the queen side. Rook a to d1, queen to e7, queen to f5, and queen to d7. Now here, white continues their very, very strong attack with g4, and we can see that black's position on the king side is starting to look a little bit testy and cramped. We have a trade of queens. Queen takes f5 and g takes f5, and this, although this may look like it actually weakens white's attack because this pawn can no longer push forward, actually by creating a half-open file along the g file, white has very, very good attacking chances with their rooks as well. Here we have c6, black preparing this queenside counterplay, and rook to g1. King to f8, getting out of this rook to king alignment because after, for example, if white had simply pushed here, we can move the king and then be threatening all kinds of stuff with this pinned pawn here, this undefended knight after moving our king out of the way, for instance. And that's just all nasty stuff. So black avoids it deftly with king to f8. We have king to f3, opening up the rooks, and a4. Rook takes g7. This is a key move in the position. White sacrifices a rook for this g7 pawn and actually gains incredible compensation. Because of how useful the g7 pawn was at defending white's king, now white just has a clear shot along this completely open g-file that they have control of. Furthermore, they will win back this f6 knight, so they're only sacrificing material-wise one point. We have king takes g7, rook to g1 check, and king to f8. Bishop takes f6, a takes b3, and rook to g7. We have rook e to c8, moving the rook out of the way so the king can make some escape from the impending checkmate threats. And rook takes h7, king to e8. We see here it's useful that black has this escape square because, of course, the bishop controls along here, and checkmate would have come with rook to h8. And a takes b3. d5, c takes d5, bishop e7, and bishop e5, avoiding a trade of bishops because white wants all of their pieces to be attacking. We have c takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop to d8, and h5. Now, black's king is very unsecure. Their bishop is doing hardly anything on its on the 8th rank, and white's rooks, even though they have one extra, are doing nothing as well over here, simply sitting passive on the 8th rank A and C files respectively. We have rook to a5 trying to gain some activity, e4 defending the knight, and rook to c1. Here we have h6, and white's passed pawn as well starts to become a problem that black has to contend with. Bishop to g5, trying to attack that pawn, rook to h8 with check, king to d7, and h7. And it was in this position where white's complete control over the king side, white's very, very far extended past h7 pawn, and black's king safety issues, that Lasnica chose to resign. Here, black will have to sacrifice a piece for this pawn to prevent its promotion. If we look at the computer's analysis and how the game may have continued, with rook to h1, king to g2, and rook to h6, followed by rook to g8, and here rook takes h7, rook takes g5. White is simply winning. White has 2 pawns and 2 minor pieces for a rook, and black has no compensation. Alright, thank you very, very much for watching all the way to the end of the video. Coming up, we're going to be looking more in depth at the different lines of the English and see what we can do with this hypermodern flank opening. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing, it really helps me out, and as always, I'll see you next time.